Hello everyone. In this short video series, we're going to go over how to set up and use JSON Web Tokens, JWT for short, in your ASP.NET Core API service. We will start fresh with the new API and add in authentication from scratch, finishing with JWT on top. If you're unfamiliar with JSON Web Tokens, it's a great way to require a user to authenticate with credentials like username and password only once, so the user won't have to send these credentials for each subsequent call. We'll finish up the series with some example calls using Postman. Let's get started. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is create a new ASP.NET Core web application. So select that from your templates. And then I'm going to name mine just JWT tutorial and create it. And then here I am going to make sure that we have .NET Core selected, and although there is 5.0 out, I'm going to create mine using 3.1. And for the template, I'm going to select API. All of this is just fine as default, no authentication because we're going to add in our own. Go ahead and create. Okay, so we have our new project. I'm going to go ahead and right click on the solution and add a new project. And this time I'm going to be choosing the class library for .NET Core. Hit next, and I'm going to call this JWT tutorial.data. Create it. Sign out. Okay. So at this point, we can go ahead and just install the Nuget packages that we need. So go ahead, right click on your solution and then go to Manage Nuget Packages for Solution and Browse. And the first one we want is ASP.NET Core Identity Entity Framework 4. And that's this guy right here, and we are going to install it in both projects, so make sure both of these are selected. And we don't want a latest stable for 5.0. what we want is 3.1.10 or really any 3.1 version. So I'm going to select that and install. Okay, the next one that we want will be Microsoft, and it's going to be Entity Framework 4.tools. So search for that, find it, and then likewise we're going to select 3.1. And for this one, we only want to install it on the data project. So I'm going to unselect the main project and install. The next one be Microsoft let's see. SQL Server. Okay. And for this one, it will only be installed on the main project. Go ahead and do that. Oh, and again, don't forget to switch the version. And then last but not least, we want to install our JWT bearer NuGet package. So that's going to be Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.Authentication.JWT bearer. And for this one, it will only be installed in the main project. So go ahead, select that, make sure that we select 3.1.10 and install. Let's get started on our application DB context. Alright, so we're going to end up using Entity Framework Core to install our database tables and everything that we'll need for the identity. To get started on that, inside of the data project, we're going to create a new class. And we're going to call this class the application DB context. Make it public. And it will inherit from identity DB context, and go ahead and pull in your Entity Framework Core, and then this takes in the identity user. Whoops, and bring in your .identity. Okay, so now inside of this, all we need to do is create the constructor for it. And close that out, and boom, we're done. Okay, close that. And we can go ahead and delete this class 1. Now, over in our main project, we're going to go ahead and create a new folder called configuration. And I don't know why I keep doing that, but make sure that it is proper case. Okay, and then inside of this guy, we're going to create 2 classes. So the first one's going to be app configuration, and this will be public, and it will also be static. And we're going to add in a static method called add default configuration. Now, over in our startup file, open this guy up, and we have configure. So just go ahead and let's copy all of this fun stuff and then add it in here. And let's see, what's the fastest way to do this? We will change this to app and rename it to builder, and then environment. And in order for this to work, we need to bring in using Microsoft.extensions.hosting. All right, and we're good there. And we are going to add one more thing from this default. So instead of that, we'll now be calling app.add default configuration. Bring in the using and then pass in environment. Okay, and as I was saying, we're going to add in one more use method in here, and that's going to be builder.use authentication. We have both authentication and authorization. Okay, so likewise in our startup, we're going to do similar to our services. I'm going to hop in here. I'm going to create a new class called app services. This will also be static. Hop over here and we will take add controllers, pop it in there, and finally we are now calling services dot add default services, and we'll pass in configuration. Okay, so now we can jump back over to our app services, and we can start adding some stuff in here. The first thing we're going to add is the DB context that we created over in our data project. So let's go ahead, right click on your main project, do add, and then we're going to add a project reference to the data. So go ahead and do that. So now service collection dot add DB context, and we want to pass in that application DB context we created. DB context, and then options dot use SQL server, and we'll have to bring in entity framework core for that, and then line down here, I'm gonna close that up, and we want configuration dot get connection string, and we're going to pass in default connection, well as migration assembly, and we're telling it just JWT tutorial. And that's essentially so we can, in our package manager console, we'll be able to run the commands for adding migrations and updating the database for Entity Framework Core from within this project, and we won't have to worry about switching context over to the data project. The next thing we're going to add in is identity. So let's go ahead and do service collection dot add identity. And we're gonna also add in a add entity framework stores, which is going to be our application DB context. Okay, and then dot add default token providers. Whoops. Okay. Next, we're going to add in the authentication. So here we added in the token providers, but here we're going to set up our authentication to use JWT bearer defaults. So service collection dot add authentication options. Whoops. And we're going to say options dot default authenticate scheme equals JWT bearer defaults. Whoops. Not supposed to be lambda. Bearer defaults. And we'll have to bring in JWT bearer Nuget, and we're going to say authentication scheme. We're also going to set the default challenge. Sorry. Default challenge scheme to JWT bearer defaults dot, and this will be authentication scheme. Well, and options dot default scheme, and you guessed it, bearer defaults dot authentication scheme. We're not going to close that just yet. We have something else to tack on. We're saying add JWT bearer. Options will be that is everything we need for our app services and app configuration for initially setting up the project. In the next part, we'll go over adding in registration and login abilities with the controller and the supporting business managers logic and all of that fun stuff. So see you in the next video.